Welcome to the Hard Skills Show with me, Dr. Mira Brancu. Today's guest is Matthew Asbell, and we're going to be talking about who actually drives your leadership identity. Do we shape our leadership in influencing others, or are we influenced by others, which shapes our leadership and brand identity? Great to have you on the show, Matthew. And you're on mute. There's always one.
Well, today it should be okay. Today I would expect it. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Today is the day. By the way, y'all, we are all, every single one of us on this show, including back channel folks, are not feeling well today. We're all sick and we're just trying to get through. So bear with us. We were all like, what is going around? Anyway, so as a reminder, on this show, we discuss how to develop the nuanced, hard skills needed to drive significant systemic change to make a real impact through your leadership. Be ready, take notes, I always do, reflect deeply, and identify at least one small step to further develop your hard skills muscle. Now, a little bit about our guest today. Matthew Asbell is kind of a Renaissance lawyer, in my opinion. He is a highly experienced intellectual property attorney with clientele and life experiences across a wide range of industries, including food and beverage, fintech and other software, entertainment and fashion, life sciences, and others. He also has a love for global culture, language, and food. And his personal and professional interests arise from a deep appreciation for creativity, whether it's in the form of invention, design, expression, or marketing. He assists clients in clearing, obtaining, enforcing, and defending trademark rights in the United States and throughout the world, and advises on utility and design patents, copyrights, domain names, and related areas. But he has so many other interests around culture and teams, how decisions are made in other areas. Now, Matthew also happens to be another host on talkradio.nyc. He hosts Intangify. So we're doing a little cross connection here. And in many ways, Intangify, his show, is complementary to our focus. He talks about the intangible aspects of business and legal issues tied to lots of intangible aspects of companies, like what creates value, right? Intellectual property, culture, teams, decisions, those kinds of areas. So I'm really interested in hearing from him about like this connection, this crossover between what we talk about here and what he talks about on his show. So welcome, Matthew.
Thanks again. Yeah, I'm very confident that despite our both being sick and Logan being sick, that if our conversation goes anywhere as well as one we had in preparation, we're golden.
Yeah, yeah. So let's start easy. I'm gonna throw you a softball first. You're interested in global language and culture and food. What is your favorite food and drink? Top,
Ooh,
or maybe top ones. Top ones.
ooh. It used to be sushi, but it's not anymore. But it still is, usually like a white flaky fish, like
Mm.
branzino or barramundi maybe. My favorite fish is called wahoo. Comes from Florida, down there. That's an amazing fish. So
Mm.
there you go. Drink, I don't know. I have to think about it.
Nice. Now
Fine.
I have not had that kind of fish, although I do like my white flaky fish. I think in the last 2 years or so, I've leaned more and more into a pescatarian diet and a Mediterranean diet. Now I as a Romanian, I sort of grew up on a diet that is kind of a crossover between Mediterranean and Middle Eastern. But fish was not as much of a thing. It's more like beef and potatoes. But I've leaned away from that and really enjoy fish at this point. So I'm totally with you there. All right. So now we're going to dig into some hard stuff now. So we hear about, let's start with this. We hear about branding and intellectual property protection as methods to developing and protecting our work and reputation. Let's start there. When you hear about, like, we have different definitions, right, of branding, and people think of different things when they think about intellectual property. How do you define branding, and how do you define intellectual property protection?
Branding is really about your reputation or about the judgments that people make about you based off of what your name, your image, your picture, whatever it is, right? It's really, at least in my view, it's really a quick shortcut to remembering aspects of the person or the business that you're dealing with. Um, so you know, so I guess that's my definition of branding. Um,
Yeah.
Intellectual property is a broad term, and not a lot of people agree on what people mean by it. Um, it centers around legal rights that are given to people who create things, and they're usually given to people who create things as an incentive. We want to incentivize people to create more music or more podcasts. We
Mm.
want to we want to incentivize people to come up with new pharmaceuticals and or new machines that will, driverless cars, etc. So we want to improve technology. We want to improve culture, but it also has a sort of consumer protection role. Um, we want to protect consumers and protect brand owners um, in relation to their reputation. We want that brand to be something they can control and that consumers can rely on.
Really interesting and great conceptualization of both. So, you know, this is a show about leadership identity and developing a strategy for mapping out your leadership development and identity. And so people might think, why are we talking about branding and intellectual property about, what? So how do you see branding and intellectual property rights as linked to shaping our leadership and influencing others?
Well, that's a pretty big question, and we might
Yeah.
have to drill down on that one a bit. Um, because on the one hand, uh, branding is not necessarily about a business and a product that you buy in a store, right? Branding is also associated with a person and how they present themselves. I'm a lawyer. I work in a law firm. My law firm has a brand, and you could elect to go and use and hire lawyers in my law firm because of their brand. Um, but um, but I also have a personal brand, and people would elect to hire me as their attorney regardless of what firm I'm at because of my personal brand. Similarly, the hard skills is a brand, and your name is a brand, right? And so there are reputations tied to all these things, and so that can tie into sort of the brand of leadership, right? How does a person um, run a business, run an organization, whatever it is that they're in charge of? And what are they known or reputed to be in terms of what they're like and what do they think of? Um, I could go on, but maybe I should pause because I feel like I'm going to dominate the call. So I'll
Yeah.
let you. I'll let you.
So let's think about this. Let's keep taking it a step further. So you've got a leader in an organization, right? Um, and they are trying to make an impact through their organization. They're trying to achieve some results through their organization, right? And they're trying to gain customers, right? Or if they're a nonprofit, it's more about like engendering trust, right? And making sure that people believe that they're true to their mission. So what are the challenges for the leader and for the organization when it comes to like how they represent their brand identity, their reputation? You know, are there things that they pitfalls when they're trying to sort of like just early on establish? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
I guess I'm not sure if this will directly answer the question, but I'll try. Um, I guess there are elements about the leader and what they're putting out there, and how they want to be seen, how they see themselves, um, and and then there is how they are actually perceived, by others, and what aspects of their leadership and their leadership style are recognized, and whether those are aligned. So it feels like, like I like to think that, for instance, as a leader, I like to think that um, it's very clear to the people who I work with that I'm looking out for them, and I want them to know that I'm looking out for them. That I've considered their situation specifically in making the decisions I made, and um, and and even though I was doing something for myself or for my client that really didn't necessarily involve them, I would include them in the calculus in what I might decide. I mean, I have some specific instances I could talk about as if desired, but I think it's what you're putting out there, how you're being received, and then maybe one last thing: how does that change over time? Did you used to be viewed a particular way and now you're viewed differently, or has it been consistent? And what has caused the change?
Yeah, let's stop there. We're reaching an ad break, and I'd love, after we come back from the ad break, to like explore this a little bit further. How the idea of branding, a reputation changing over time can be a risk or it can be an opportunity. And like how do you sort of influence that, right? Or how might you be influenced to change over time? Which impacts which. So let's do that when we come back from the break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Matthew Asbell. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to join us online, on the online audience, and ask questions that we can answer in real time, find us on LinkedIn or on YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mir Brancu, and our guest, Matthew Asbell. Okay, so we're just getting into this kind of interesting intersection of intellectual property, reputation, and leadership identity. And where we left off is how sometimes branding can, and your reputation, or how people view you or how you see yourself changes over time, right? That makes sense from like just a logical, personal perspective. We all change over time. But when you think about like your brand, there can be risks associated with your brand changing. There could be opportunities. And I find this really fascinating. I think about a couple of things, and you and I talked about this when we were prepping. I came up with like the new Coke, and we're dating ourselves here a little bit. There was like in the 1980s, Coca-Cola decided to put out new Coke, and everybody hated it. And like they thought they were like leaning into something good, and didn't realize that it would be so off-putting to people. And yet there's other companies that transition pretty well. We talked about like Dunkin' Donuts going to Dunkin', Barbie has transformed, right, over time. And that was like palatable, acceptable. So when you think about like brands changing over time, our reputation, how we put ourselves out there, like, why is it that sometimes it's acceptable and sometimes it's not acceptable? And do we have control over that?
Yeah, I think you have to start with what drove the change, right? Sometimes the change is made because the outside, the consumer, the population want it. I think another example we talked about was the Washington Redskins. The
Yes.
Washington Redskins, no longer called that, were that was, I think, what, 30, 40 years of objections by the public,
Yeah.
and lawsuits, and multiple lawsuits, until they made that change. You use the example of Dunkin' Donuts. To me, there'll always be Dunkin' Donuts, and yet I don't go buy the donuts because it's bad for my diet. But I'll go there and have a coffee. And so I feel, and I don't know that I'm representative of all of their consumers or majority of them or whatever, but I would say that probably people recognize Dunkin' Donuts as being, yes, they have these donuts and muffins and bagels and whatever, and coffee. And it's more of a place where you go for coffee with something. So the change really, I think, kind of followed suit with the outside perception. When you go to the new Coke example, here, I don't know what went into it, but my assumption is that the leadership at Coca-Cola at the time, said, we're going to revolutionize things. We're going to really shake it up. We're going to distance ourselves from Pepsi and RC, and we're going to be, and no one's going to be able to keep up with our innovative change. And so here we go. And they didn't have their finger on the pulse of their audience who loved their product the way it was. So much so that they had to dial the whole thing back.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing from this is if you are tracking the trends and listening and paying attention to what people want or what people are struggling with, your people, right? The people that are either your ideal clients or the people who are your constituents, in the case of like either nonprofits or politics or things like that, and you're leaning into that, then the rebranding or the small adjustments to how you present your work or your products will help your clients, your consumers, your customers feel heard, feel like, hey, they heard me, they listened to what we asked for, and they'll be even more loyal or supportive, right? And then if you instead go all gung-ho and say, we want to own this market, and you're sort of creating it like in isolation of what you might be, or it just feels like completely disconnected from your constituents, then it's going to go awry. Is that right? Usually? Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, we need to try to understand who we're serving, and we need to adjust and mold ourselves to the extent possible, our offerings and the way we serve them to meet those needs. And like we're in an increasingly automated world, and and what makes human leaders is that exact opposite aspect, that we are not formulaically deciding how to do things or dictating things. We are taking feedback and using that to tailor to meet the needs of the people who we're trying to serve. I think that's like the ultimate best way you can be. Now, that's part of hopefully my personal branding. I want it to be. Hopefully, if I say it, it'll be true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's making me think about, I mean, my own process. So, my company used to be, and it still is on paper, called Bronco and Associates, legally. And I started that way, partly because I didn't know what else to call it, but also because it was really important to me to keep my name. My name is unique. It's kind of a legacy thing. But over time, I just felt like it felt more and more stuffy to me, which is not representative of kind of the feel of how I work and how other people necessarily see me, or how I want other people to see me. And even though like I really wanted to keep the end associates because I wanted to send the message that I actually, work with other people. That's how I work, in collaboration. It again, like it felt like too stuffy a name for how I work. And so it took me 5 years to get to the point of like being ready to lean into a brand new name, TowerScope. And I mean, a year-long process of even exploring what this name would be and why. And ultimately it was well received, but partly because I gave a lot of explanation of why I made the change, and it resonated with people. And it was partly about me, yes, but partly about connecting better to the people that I served, right? So, it could have gone awry though. Like people could have hated it because I wanted to change it. It's like I didn't have to change it, but I wanted to. But it resonated, and I think it is because I sort of like used it as another opportunity to connect with people.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I didn't know you when you weren't TowerScope, but the way you describe it makes a lot of sense. So what I was imagining as you were speaking, I was thinking about an example like the new Coke example that was more successful.
Mm-hmm.
And and the one that it came up with off the top of my head is the Apple logo. So you remember when the Apple logo was like a rainbow? it was a rainbow colored apple. It's the same
Oh,
apple
yeah.
shape. It's a rainbow
Yeah.
color,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Uh-huh.
And I don't know, was it the 90s maybe that they became the white apple? Um, it went from being a 60s or 60s, 70s generation, you know, the computer made in your garage thing to, clean, crisp, modern. And I don't feel that anybody had a problem with that change, right? Now,
Mhm.
maybe it's because the product didn't change. New Coke, right? The products changed, and Apple products have changed over the years, but I don't think that it was a drastic change. There, it was the image, and it was about changing the image to reflect what the company was about, what their products were like, and that logo's stuck just as well as the rainbow did or it must be around much longer than the rainbow at this point.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, right, to make a change like that, kind of because you're trying to convey something about your brand. You're trying to convey, not being stuffy and being accessible, and other things that you went into that decision, even though you made that decision kind of without saying, "Hey, should I do this?" Um, your explanation makes a lot of sense, and it aligns better with the way in which you are perceived.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and this makes me think now, and we had touched on this a little bit when we were prepping. What happens if something goes awry? Like there's a mistake your company makes, it gets in the news, you get bad press, a bad review. There's a real chance of it marring your reputation and your brand, even if it's a strong brand, right? What are your thoughts on like, you know, how companies navigate that, how they think about their reputation, in terms of consistency? Actually, we're nearing an ad break, so I'm gonna just drop that as a seed for us to think about, right? And we will be right back. Again, if you'd like to join our online audience and ask questions that we can answer in real time, find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guests in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies, from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and Intangify your business today.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Matthew Asbell. We we're just starting to talk about what happens when a brand owner addresses or experiences a mistake, an error, something that mars their reputation, or they're worried about it marring their reputation because, you know, the mistake or error gets in the media, or somebody puts a bad review, right? And when it comes to small businesses, especially, it's like our greatest nightmare. So, how does a brand owner address those things? What do they think about? Is it about expectation setting? What are your thoughts on that? And you're on mute again.
Out of practice. So I had an answer, and then I rethought it before I had a chance to say it. So I'm glad, because I've got more to say.
Yeah.
I think my answer first is the lawyerly answer of it depends, and nobody likes to hear that answer,
Ah.
but it does depend on the brand, because who is the brand, and what does the brand stand for? What are the expectations of that brand? I don't want to get into a political discussion, but if you think of like our former president and what his brand is and how he would handle such a thing, I think you can understand that is different from maybe how someone else might address a problem or an error. My initial inclination was to say, though, you know, you need to own your mistake or error if it is yours. And again, it does depend on your brand, but taking ownership of it, apologizing and addressing it in a mature way is often a good way to deal with it. Unless it's something so devastating that the damage is done and it doesn't matter. No one's going to appreciate an apology, and you have to get away from it. Sometimes the answer is to rebrand. Put on a new outfit, get a new haircut, and be a new person, so that people don't look at you the way they looked at that other person. But that's drastic, right? I mean, more often than not, an error or mistake doesn't have to be so life altering, so that it would require that, but there is that option.
Yeah. This reminded me of a local business I remembered that were getting so eviscerated in by just a small number of people that they did rebrand, and I thought that was really interesting, and it did help. And yeah, I've seen that a few times before. But I also really like what you said about thinking about responding that is consistent with your brand. Like, that makes a lot of sense, that if you want to continue sending a clear message about what you're about, and let's say you're about integrity, right? And honesty and openness or something like that, right? Let's say that's part of your brand. Then that is the way that you're supposed to be responding if you were consistent with your brand. I never thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, and it's probably much more easily done than said, because if it's about you as a person, right, you're really talking about who you are. And yes, there's the brand that you may kind of decide that this is who you are and how you want to portray yourself. But essentially, if you're true to yourself, then that is how you will respond, right? Because your brand accurately reflects who you are. So yeah, if you're someone who is thoughtful about the people and who might have been hurt or damaged by the mistake, you have to own up to it, right? But if you're known to be the kind who trudges forward and is too fast moving to worry about little things like that, then maybe you don't say anything and you keep moving forward.
Yeah. It just it makes me think that the most important thing then to a leader's personal brand and an organization's brand is less about the logo, the images, the colors, and much more about consistency and sending the same like messages, right? Like you said, a brand is really about like a shortcut to how people remember you. But if you're inconsistent, that brand is not going to be all that useful, right?
Well, or your brand will be remembered as being inconsistent. I
Right.
mean, think about, I'm sure that there are products you've purchased where, where one time it was good and another time it was bad. And you've gotten to believe that, yeah, I can't really count on this product, so I'm not going to bother buying it, or I'll take a chance on it maybe again, but I don't trust it. And then there are other ones where you're like, every time I get this, it's always good. And that's the idea, right? I mean, if every time you get it, it's always good, then that's the reputation for the quality of the product. Then you want to keep buying that product, and that's the benefit of that, of that brand. People appreciate your services. They'll come back to you
Yeah.
because you served them well before, and they know that you'll take care of them.
Yeah. This also actually makes me think of kind of the next folks in line in an organization, right? So like, I can immediately think about some food chains that in general I like, but there are some areas where I won't order from that area because they're so inconsistent with the output, right? The results. And it's for some reason, it doesn't necessarily always mar the big, chain name. But for small business owners, it's much more likely to mess with your brand if you have hired a group of people to all do what you do in some way, right? They all have to represent you, and you have to sort of set a tone to help them understand, like, what is our brand, right? What are our values? How do we engage people? How do we engage customers? What is the quality of our work? What does it look like? What is the consistency in how we communicate? All of this is part of a brand. And if you've got just one or two people who are not, able to do that as consistently, to send the same messaging, it can really mess up the brand.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And, that there are ways in which I've seen it work. Some of these, like you mentioned, food chains, large multinational food chains, like fast food chains, have modified their brand in the different places where they are operating, so that the version of their food in Egypt will be very, very different than the version of their food in India versus the version of the food anywhere else. And so maybe some things would be consistent, like the French fries, maybe are always the same or something like that. But then there's going to be a local product, something that caters to the local audience, and that's accepted, all under the same umbrella brand. So you can, when you're that big, I think there's almost an expectation that there'll be inconsistency, and yet you can still have that because you can have sub brands, and because you can, what's the word, like, set up smaller consistent. I can't. My COVID's not working. Contingencies.
Yeah.
Contingencies.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for a smaller business, yeah, I think you're right. An inconsistency is more impactful because there's a greater expectation of that consistency, and there should be. And I think that's why franchises, can do well. They set themselves up with those types of standards, and they tell the people who are going to be franchisees, right, how to do their business, and keep them in line doing that in order to ensure that consistency. but um, but it's very hard to replicate yourself. So you have to for me in my work, it comes down to um, finding colleagues that I work well with and repeatedly working with those colleagues.
Mhm.
But I still have to be involved, to make sure that the clients who have the expectation from me are getting the service that they expect from me, even if my colleague is doing some or all of the work.
Absolutely. So, what is the strategy behind how leaders can find a way to both set consistent expectations about how they want to be seen, right? Their identity, their communication, the whole brand, while also understanding how to manage other people's different experience and expectations of the branding and identity, whether they're like working with different people from your company, or, how do they balance that?
Feels like the ultimate challenge for me.
Yeah.
I think that everybody's dealing with that. Maybe I'm wrong, but there's an element of push and pull. You've got to put out there your expectations. This is what you've got to identify. What are the characteristics? Put out there those characteristics. Make it known to the people who you have that expectation. That they will meet those qualities, hire that way, and then you have to at the same time have your eyes and ears open and listen, to hear what people are saying to you and how they're responding to you and what they're delivering to you, and then decide, is there a message there? And sometimes you have to invite them. I found out that there are people who are afraid to tell me stuff. Like people who I work with are afraid to tell me, certain things, because of my role, because of where my level is. And so I have to make it a point to say, look, I want your feedback. I want you to challenge me. If you don't challenge me, I'm going to believe that I'm right and that you agree with me. I need you to challenge me so that I don't do that. And so that I actually learn and listen to you and learn from you. And then you can help me do a better job with the work I'm doing. So you have to be both putting it out there and listening and absorbing. I don't know how well I do that. I'm a work in progress, but I'm mindful of trying to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is the key, is there's got to be some kind of communication flow, not just like within the organization among the leadership team, whoever's in the organization, but also between you and your stakeholders, and that could be your customers or the constituents or whatever. How do you get that feedback loop so that where people are resonating and where they're struggling, right? And that helps you find that right balance between the consistent expectation setting and messaging, but also flexing and adapting to the needs of your constituents, right? So when we're reaching another one more ad break, and when we come back, I'd love to hear from you about now looping it back to your profession, the legal implications. What should we be thinking about when we think about intellectual property and this reputation setting and that kind of thing? Are there pitfalls? Are there, ways to be flexible? That's kind of what's on my mind right now. So we're going to go right into this ad break, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and with our guest, Matthew Asbell, who is also the host of Intangify on talkradio.nyc. So we've talked a lot about branding being reputation and a shortcut to how people remember you. We've talked about intellectual property rights and how that, protects your creation of things. And then we really talked a lot about how do you shape your leadership, what shapes your, how people see you, how you communicate your message, how you sort of stay flexible when, and sort of creating that feedback loop to be able to sort of lean into knowing when to adjust. And now I'd like to sort of close the loop back to your profession. Right? As an attorney, as someone who is especially an expert in intellectual property and protecting your property rights and things like that, when should people be thinking about the legal side with all of this? When should they be thinking about intellectual property and rights, protection of those? What are your thoughts on that? Third time's a charm, Matthew.
It's not COVID. Blame it all on COVID.
Blame it on COVID.
All right. So the instantaneous answer to your question, which is not the right answer, right, is always. Of course, that's not the right answer, right? Because nobody really, except for me, I'm thinking about it always, but nobody else is. In fact, I'm usually the last, to know that there are very few people who think about it with any type of frequency, and it's kind of a curse. It follows me places. I can't go and enjoy an amusement park without thinking about intellectual property aspects of things, but we'll leave that for another day. When should they be thinking about it? So I think primarily it comes down to maybe two things. More things may occur, but this is what occurs for now. One is when something that you are doing or you are thinking about doing could possibly violate someone else's rights. So when you came up with the name TowerScope, I don't know if you checked to see if there was another TowerScope providing similar types of services,
Yes.
right? But that's a good idea, right? So that you don't later find out that you can't do it and you're at the end of a lawsuit or you're forced to stop and rebrand or anything of that nature, right? So when to think, one time to think about things is, all right, are you using anybody else's property? Anytime you are using anybody else's property, whether it's an image or words or a logo or anything of that nature, and a product, you potentially could be infringing someone's rights. And so that is a time to think about intellectual property. The other time that I thought of is the converse, which is, what would be important to you to stop if you found out that someone else started doing? In other words, if you found out that someone else was operating, a podcast called The Hard Skills, or a psychological consultancy, I can't say that either, called Tower Scope, or called Tower Scope, or Tower Scopes, or some variation, right? And where they were doing it, right? So what if they're doing it in the UK or Europe or China? So where would it matter and where would it not? And if you think about the instances where it would trouble you, then an IP attorney could assist you with, how could I make sure that that won't happen? Or in a more costly way, how could I address it when it does happen? So the idea is you engage with someone like me early on, not necessarily to have to spend a lot of money or to do a lot of things, but to align on what it is you are doing and planning to do. And then as you grow, you have, a team member to go to on those issues. Hey, this came up, this is what I'm trying to do next. This is how I'm expanding. So, do I need to do anything here? And my most successful client relationships are those, the ones where we have regular, not necessarily daily or weekly, but maybe quarterly communications where we regroup, they tell me things that are going on, and we align on what the next steps are, if any.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's super helpful guidance. And yes, Tower Scope, everyone out there, don't step on it because it is trademarked at the federal level. Can't step on it.
And IP attorneys.
Yeah, and it's really like, because it's such an important thing to me, right? There's so much that goes under it that's important. So and I, that is the same sort of way that I engaged in, like, if I want to have other arms or other products under it, right? What can I do to protect that kind of information as well, right? So that this has been really helpful, really great information, very interesting in how you think about, when you think about intellectual property or you think about trademark, you're like, that sounds boring. But you sort of think about it from a very broad, big perspective about reputation and communication and consistency, which I think is how we should be going about thinking about these things, because, why did we start our companies? Why do we have our organizations in the first place? So if you would like to learn more about Matthew Asbell, you can look him up on LinkedIn, right? If you'd like to explore more about how my company and I can help you with leadership and team development services, you could check us out at gotowerscope.com. And also make sure to look up Matthew's show on talkradio.nyc Intangify. You'll definitely learn a lot. So audience, what did you take away? And more importantly, what is the one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Matthew? Share it with us on LinkedIn at Mira Brancu or at talkradio.nyc or Matthew Asbell, and share it with us there so that we can cheer you on. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place, but LinkedIn is where I live online and where I will respond. In addition to being a live show, we are also on iTunes and Spotify, don't forget. So please go subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, share with others, help us increase our reach and visibility and impact. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I'm Dr. Mara Bronco, your host of the Hard Skills Show. Thank you for joining us today, Matthew.
So much for
Great
having
to
me.
have you. And have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from.
You're listening